the dramatic effect.
That's exactly right. I need a drum roll as well. You know, what's interesting is that a while ago, I came across your videos and I went to message you, and then I realized like, oh, we had actually talked a little bit like way back in like 2020.
Yeah, way back.
Yeah, way back. So I was like, oh, we go way back. So it was, it was interesting to look back and see, because it's interesting because there are a lot of people who got into UX writing and content design during the pandemic or after it. But you were one of those people who was sort of around when I was first doing the podcast. And actually, I think I asked you, do you want to do the podcast? And you were like, oh, I don't think I've been around that long. And I don't know if I don't know if I should. So I think 5 years is like a perfect amount of time, more than enough time for you to come on and have a chat. So I'm really glad it's taken us 5 years, but here we are.
I know, it feels like a career signifier because I was exploring content design while I listened to your podcast for the first time. And now to like be on it, like I feel kind of cool about it.
Well, you are very cool. But it's funny because like in the beginning, it was a struggle to get people on because people didn't know me. And so I would ask people like, you know, do you want to come on my podcast? And actually the first couple of people who I asked were like, yeah, sure. But there were like, it's surprising the amount of people who were like, oh, I have to go through my company's PR, or, you know, I have to ask certain people. I had to send like PR people like a list of questions. And sometimes companies don't understand that like what a podcast is. I think more do now. But like they were like, oh, we want the questions you're going to ask. And I'm like, okay, well, here are the questions I plan to ask, but the conversation might go anywhere. So I can't guarantee that these are like only the questions I'm going to ask. So I know it's strange, but I'm really glad we're chatting. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me about you is you have this great ability to not only, obviously, you know, you're an accomplished content designer, judged by your work, but and your career history, but you know, you do all of these videos. And they are a great way, I think, for people to get an idea about, you know, what content designers do and what the work is really like. Because there's a big difference between, you know, sitting down and doing the work and actually explaining what it is that we do. And you have this very approachable personality, I feel, that comes through in your videos. And I'd love to know like what inspired you to even start doing that in the first place. Because there aren't a lot of like content design vloggers, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
What made you want to start doing that sort of stuff?
No, that's a great question. And I think it's exactly what you've mentioned, that there's a lack of people with like, I guess, like internet presence who are content designers. You see a lot of UX design influencers. You see some UX research people doing their thing. You see, I think especially during 2020, the boom of like day in the life of a software engineer type of videos floating around everywhere. I just wanted to add a little bit of diverse voice into the pool. And I also see myself being someone who didn't have a lot of exposure to different career paths. And I really love my job. So I want more people to know about it. And that was pretty much it. I mean, I did have a film degree back in college.
Cool.
I went to a film school. I studied media studies because I thought I was going to become like a film critic or some kind. So I thought, you know, it would be a good creative outlet to also put my film degree somehow in use on my spare time.
Well, you and I have something in common, because I was also accepted into film school.
Oh, no way.
Right after high school, I got accepted into film school, and then I got a second round offer in Australia to go to journalism school. So I had this decision, like, do I go to film school or journalism school? So I decided on journalism. But I think like what I was going to ask you, actually, like you mentioned the day in the life boom that happened during COVID. What always really bothered me about those was because like you'd see some people doing these day in the life videos and you'd be like, I know what it's like to work at one of these companies, and it doesn't seem like you're it seems like you're showing a pretty sunny side of what you're doing, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, how do you have the time in the day to be able to do this sort of stuff like all the time? I
Mm-hmm. It's like,
I
I
don't
know
get
you're
it.
not doing any work.
They'd be like, oh, and it's midday and I'm going to the gym and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And I'm like, okay, like you're either like doing heaps of work and only showing the parts where you didn't, or like you are wildly, I don't know, like out of touch with the work that you're doing. I don't know. It
Mm-hmm.
just seemed very strange
I
to
think it was
me.
like very ironic that a lot of the a lot of the day in the life vloggers eventually became like the first round of people who got laid off too. I don't
Yeah.
know if there's like association with that, but that was definitely a direction of content I wanted to stray away from. Like, I want to show you
Yeah.
the day in the life, but like I'm actually doing work.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But the thing was, like, you and those people who were doing those sorts of posts, they were posting them like every day, like you know what I mean, like content all the time. And I think you and I both know if you're working in a role, you don't have time a lot of the time to post that sort of stuff like all the time. Most of the
no.
designers who I've known are like you know, a lot of great designers don't have any internet presence at all. It's because they're sort
Mm-hmm.
of heads down. But let's like rewind a little bit. So, how did you first get into content design? And can you take us through a little bit of your career and what you're doing now?
Yeah. Right after film school, I realized that I was going to become a starving artist. It was not working out. And for those who don't know me, I'm not a U.S. citizen, so working in the United States requires a very strenuous process of being very strategic about every single step that you take. So with my film degree, being on the student visa, I have about a year where I can work in the United States. But I need to find a job within 60 days of graduating. Otherwise, the whole year of work authorization is out the door. And I think by senior year, I'm pretty certain that I wasn't going to be able to find any jobs. So I convinced my parents to send me to grad school. And I was really trying to use this as an opportunity to pivot and be more realistic about my career path in the United States. So I went to University of Washington for their communication and leadership program, trying to dabble into marketing where I could still be a little bit creative, but also there are more marketing roles out there. I was taking my coursework pretty focused on marketing, new technology, all that kind of stuff. Because I also know that the step after student visa is a work visa, and work visa is a very expensive process that only big tech companies have the resources to sponsor. So I was pretty on track with that. Um, my program offers some UX design courses and content design related courses as well. They're more introductory, I'd say, but I had a lot of classmates doing courses like that. And during the summer, when we have no classes, they would get together and like work on their portfolio together. I had this huge sense of FOMO where I felt like I wasn't doing anything while everyone else is working on their portfolio. But I wasn't super drawn into doing UX design. Like I didn't feel compelled to, in a very basic term, like drawing boxes on Figma. Um, and that's when some of my friends were like, hey, like we're going to try this UX writing challenge. Like you get a prompt every day in your email. You want to give that a try? Like, you don't really have to use Figma. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't know what that is, but I'll try so that I can, be a part of something and feel productive. And I remember I posted the day one, which is like the flight cancellation
Yeah.
scenario, something like that. I posted it. I felt super insecure about it. Like posted it and went to bed immediately, like turned off my phone and everything. I'm like, I'm going to be roasted. Like this is going to be horrible. Um, I woke up the following morning and everyone was like, this is great work. I wish I wrote like that. And then I'm like, wait, like, am I good at something actually? And I think it just changed a entire new possibility of a
Mhm.
career path for me. And I just continued working on it. And I really enjoyed doing a lot of these prompts. I loved being able to think through, put myself in the shoes of others and then create content based on that. And then I started to, talk to people about content design, but like there weren't that many people with the job title of content design or UX writing. So it just kind of become a thing that was on the back burner. I told myself, like I'm going to continue with this marketing in tech path, but if something comes up, I'll give that a try. At that time, I was interning at a local PR agency because I was told that the best way to get your foot in the door into marketing in big tech companies is to have agency experience. So I was in a PR agency doing absolutely intern work. I was not doing any
grunt work.
Groundwork, yeah. I was doing grunt work, and I just feel super unfulfilling, and I feel like my talent or what I'm passionate about is not being fully utilized. That's when a 3-month temporary backfill position at Microsoft as a content designer opened up. And one of my classmates, alum, works at Microsoft as a content designer. And she was like, yeah, like it's 3 months temporary. So if anyone in like our program is interested, let me know. And I looked at it. I opened the job description. I saw that it required 10 years of experience. And I like closed the window immediately. I was no. Okay, that's all I need to know. No, thank you. But I think a week later, I was like, like, what do I have to lose?
Yeah.
Let me just try and see what happens. And the alum knew me from some of my social media work. So I managed my grad program's social media, Instagram, for like half a year or something. And during that time, we, grad program social media, it's usually very boring and it's just like event announcements. And I added a lot of personality into it because I wanted to be more fun and connect with my, fellow classmates or prospective students. So she knew me from that. So she knew that I have a lot of strategic thinking going into the content that I create. But she's like, do you have any like content design, UX writing experience? And I pulled out my like 15-day UX writing challenge. I was like, this is all I have. Is that fine? And she's like, you know what? Like, I'm going to put in good words for you, but the rest is up to you.
Yeah.
And pretty much, I think 2 days later, I got a call and the hiring manager was like, do you want to come to Microsoft on site, like, and do an interview with us? And I didn't even think too much about it because I still remember like it required 10 years of experience. I have 0. But I was like, yeah, I'll be there. Thinking that now I have a lot of bragging rights to my friends that I interviewed at Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. I've never been inside of a Microsoft office. Like I get to see what a tech company looks like. Yeah. It's going to be awesome. I interviewed, showed them my work. They gave me a take-home exam, which is, still there. And I did that. I had a lot of fun doing that. I did spend like 7 hours doing that.
Did they say to you like, oh, don't only spend like a few hours on this or like 2 hours on it? Did they say that to you?
Yeah, they said like, don't spend too much time on it.
All of them say that. And no one does it. Everyone spends like 20 hours doing it. Like, I don't know one person who's only spent like a couple of hours doing it. Everyone does more time.
Yeah. I think they're legally required to not make you work for too long because then maybe they have to pay you. Like it's some kind of employment thing going on. But yeah, everyone does it.
Yeah.
But I submitted it. I still didn't think too much about it. I'm like,
do you remember what it was? What the take-home exam was?
Yeah, it was a there was a website, like just a screenshot of website, and then they give you the Microsoft like voice and tone guidelines and all that, and you try to make changes. It's a PDF file too. It wasn't like even Figma. So you like draw little notes next to it and write like, I would change this to that because of this and that. There was a blog post as well, which like I've been in the industry for a while now. I've never had to edit a blog post.
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
And I think there was like a few other like maybe 1 to 2 flows too, where you would make changes.
Yeah.
I submitted that. I was like, this is great. Like I got to even experience interviewing as a content designer. I still didn't think too much about it. And I think like 3 days later, I was on the subway. I was taking the subway to my internship, dreading it. And I was just scrolling on my phone and I saw an email came in and it was like the hiring manager. And she was like, hey, do you have 20 minutes to talk? I'd love to offer you the role. And like, I tried really hard to contain like my scream on the subway because I am in a public space. But
It's the
that changed
subway, though.
everything.
Like, everything happens on there. It's fine.
That's true.
Yeah. That's awesome. And it's your story just then reminds me of so many stories I've heard, which is that people just continually underestimate themselves and underestimate their abilities. You know, so many of those ads will say, we want 5 years experience, we want 10 years experience, but so much of the time, I don't know if you've ever been in a position where you're hiring people, but you just get so many, for lack of a better word, like drop kicks, just like applying for roles. Not people who only have like 1 or 2 years experience, people who aren't even like interested in the industry, you know, like, and
Exactly.
you really can't overestimate how much people will apply who are not interested in it at all. So a lot of the time, that sort of 5 or 10 years experience is really just shorthand for saying we want you to be invested. And so the fact that you had done a challenge is a good sign to them that, like, yeah, you've invested your own time and effort into this industry and learning more, you know.
Yeah.
So it's something that comes up again and again. But clearly you did something right. So then you're at Microsoft, and what was it like? Because you're, for a lot of people, getting into one of the major tech companies is like you know, it's a big step. It's a big accomplishment. When you get there, what did you what how did you find it? You know, what was the atmosphere like, and you know, how did you become accustomed to going, you know, very early in your career too, which is, you know, for a lot of people, they don't get to one of those companies until, you know, later. um
Yeah.
so what was it like for you?
The imposter syndrome was crazy.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I just felt like, oh my God, they're going to find out one day that I'm a fraud. I
Hmm.
don't know what I'm doing and it's going to be awful. I didn't know how to use Figma. So I kindly asked one of the content designers to give me a 40-minute crash course on Figma so that I can at least be in
Please
the
help.
same space. Yeah,
Yeah.
please help. Like, I want to be able to work with the designers. Um, I had a PM that was already like super aggressive from day one. That eventually became like one of a really great PM towards
Aggressive,
the
like how,
end.
like in what way?
Like, you need to work on this like already, and I want you to go
Okay.
into like the string files and make
Okay.
changes like
Okay.
over there.
Like a JSON file or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so my manager really had to like set a lot of boundaries for me early on, which I was really grateful for because I
Okay.
was in a position where I'm like, oh, this is my first job. I need to make friends, not enemies.
Sure. Yeah.
I need to be, super adaptable, super flexible. And
And you
then
don't know what you don't know, right? Like, you don't know what the
yeah.
relationships are between these because there's always like the organization official hierarchy, like you've got your product manager and you've got your developers alongside you, whatever. But then there's also the unsaid hierarchy, which is like who influences who, and like
Mm-hmm.
who's the, for lack of a better word, the arsehole on the team, who's like the person that you go to for like support with stuff. Like, figuring that stuff out takes time.
Yeah,
Not
for
just for someone
sure.
who's new to a career in general, but for anyone. So you're dealing with sort of two challenges at the same time.
Yeah. And, like I was working with designers and then finding out that I was the only content designer on the team. That was kind of
Hmm.
hard as well. That job I worked with 40 something PMs. So, I mean, like even
Wow.
remembering names was like difficult.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
the crazy amount of switching context, that was really challenging too.
Yeah.
But I think because I was so new, so fresh, all of that seemed exciting. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I get to learn. I get to deal with these challenges and come out of it being more experienced. So I was just very open to it.
Hmm.
And yeah, like the initial very aggressive PM ended up becoming like a really good PM friend of mine.
Great.
who really valued my work, had a lot of great things to say about me, and constantly reminded me how much he misses me after I left the
Oh,
company.
that's nice.
Yeah. So, like, I learned a lot about cross-functional relationship management through that very first job too,
Yeah.
and it was great. And
Don't you think though that like I don't know. I think we talk about like imposter syndrome a lot in this industry and in tech in general. I I guess I have a little bit of a controversial view that like a little bit of imposter syndrome is actually good because if you get to a role and people say like, oh yeah, when are they going to find out? I don't know what I'm doing, but it's also like you don't know what you're doing a little bit. You're in this position where you haven't done it before, and to me, that's a good type of anxiety because I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. It's not. Obviously, you can go too far where you're saying like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it. That's too far in the opposite direction. But a little bit of like, ooh, I'm a little bit anxious here. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm going to dive in and figure it out. To
mhm.
motivate you to to really succeed. I tend to see that as a little bit of a good thing, and it clearly helped you in this case. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think a little bit of, curiosity, modesty as well. Like,
Right?
you should never think that you're the smartest person in the
Totally.
room.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think curiosity was really helpful for my first role.
What did you find about work? You mentioned working with the product managers, 40 different product managers, and obviously, like I think product management it's interesting because the PM role has had a lot of attention in tech because it is depending on the company they are either like the CEO of a product or they're more of like a delivery enabler. And depending on where you go, that relationship can look quite different. What was it like at Microsoft, and how did you find yourself working with those PMs?
There was so many different kinds of personalities. There's
Mm,
definitely a blend of every type. You have the ones who are just like, I don't care what you do. I just need this and I need this by today.
yep.
And the other ones with a bit more curiosity of like, hey, like, I've never worked with a content designer before. Like, what do you actually do?
Yeah.
So I think, a lot of it is being adaptable and catering towards the language that they speak, just so that I can gain some type of respect
Yeah.
from the start, and the working relationship is not as I guess difficult as it could potentially be if I'm not as adaptable. Um, but there was definitely a lot of different kinds of personalities and different, I guess, agenda too.
Mm. What was the biggest learning gap for you? Because I remember working with PMs both in a full time role or a freelance role. One of the biggest learning gaps for me was learning about software architecture. So learning the stack of what's actually driving the product and what we could do or couldn't do, and that was a big learning gap for me. What was the biggest gap for you in working with those PMs and in Microsoft in general?
I think I would say the same thing.
Hmm.
I was working on a B2B product with a lot of years of tech debt
Okay.
and complex architecture. So when I'm like, okay, I'm only changing this string, but why can't you do it? Or I think this flow would be so much better, but why can't we do it? um, a lot of time is just like we simply just can't because our tech
Yeah.
is way too old and this is not possible. um, I think that was a moment when I start to some like build relationship with engineers as well, to
Mm.
help me understand what is even feasible from the start so that I don't get the harsh truth a little later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was another part that has been kind of helpful, because I'm gonna get one version from the PMs, but it's much easier if I get the version from the engineers.
Yeah. It's interesting too because working obviously I've never worked at Microsoft, so I don't know what the dynamic is like, but that idea of running into those boundaries where you're like, why can't we just do XYZ? Why can't we do this? And I've in my experience, if you don't educate yourself on those types of boundaries as a content designer, you end up looking a little bit naive because you just end up having frustrating conversations with people where you look like you don't know what you're talking about. Because if you just say, well, I just want to do this, or I just want to do this, and the developers are sort of over there going like, I don't know how to tell you that we can't, and no amount of I don't know, forcing your opinion is going to change the subject, because the problem is not at the design level, it's at like the architecture level. So the
Yeah,
more that
and
you can, sorry, go on.
no, and more selfishly speaking, like if your thing never ships, you can never talk about it as a real project because
Right.
because you have nothing real to talk about. It never shipped, and you were the one that blocked it from happening. So um, there's a balance of pushing for good UX,
Hmm.
but pushing it realistically.
Yeah. And so where did you go after Microsoft?
After Microsoft, I didn't want to box myself into just becoming that like niche down B2B content designer. So I was like, okay, my next thing, I wanted to be a consumer facing application,
Mm-hmm.
any kind. Better if it's mobile, because my design work were all in desktop, and I don't think we're going to be in desktop forever. I want some mobile experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied to a few places. Given my visa situation, I probably have like 60-80% less jobs that I can actually apply to,
Mm-hmm.
because I would be just automatically rejected the moment they realize that I need work visa sponsorship. But I eventually ended up at Uber, which was exactly what I wanted at the time. It's a mobile device. I was working on the rider experience, which is super consumer facing. Millions of people use the app. So that became my career pivot. But uh, during the interview, I realized that because I was working on B2B product, a lot of the people who were working on consumer products didn't really understand the complexity that I was facing when it comes to my set of B2B problems.
Mm.
And it was kind of hard to articulate my design in a way that people would understand. And with the old deck, no, with the old set of tech debt at Microsoft, a lot of the design don't end up looking pretty either.
Yeah.
It's not like flashy design. It's not pretty design. And I think that was also a little difficult to convey that, like, this is just what we have,
Mm.
and I make the best out of the situation. But still super fortunate that I ended up somewhere else.
But now you
Afterwards.
have this great experience because you've worked at both B2B and B2C. And
Yeah.
B2B is interesting because you end up having these. It's one of those situations where, a lot of the traditional UX writing or content design rules don't necessarily apply one to one to B2B as they do B2C. Where, you hear a lot of the time, don't use jargon. Or don't use complicated terms. But for a lot of B2B users, they actually want that. To them, it's not jargon. To them, it is,
Mm-hmm.
the term that they understand. Um, it was interesting to me because when I was working on accounting software, it was B2B, obviously, but we were focusing on two audiences. One is business owners, and another were accountants. And
Mm-hmm.
business owners wanted very simplistic, straightforward language because they hate doing it. But accountants wanted very technical and specific language because that was, this is the work that they do every day. So balancing those two things was interesting. But it must have been interesting going from, a B2B specific environment to now a consumer environment with some of those more traditional content design rules actually apply. In some ways,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like it would be easier.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I think part of it is also, with my B2B software, which was like a customer support agent type of software,
Hmm.
when we were doing user research, a lot of people would blame themselves if they couldn't figure out something,
Mm.
because that's their job, their livelihood. So they blame themselves. But, with a consumer app, if they can't figure it out, they will blame you.
Yeah.
They will
Right.
blame they will
Yeah.
blame the company.
Yeah.
So I think emotionally, there's a bit more at stake, knowing that people are counting on you to make the user experience easy and seamless and smooth.
Hmm.
Versus in B2B, a lot of our feature requests were coming in from companies, not individuals.
Right.
So there's that layer of difference.
Yeah, interesting. Now, one of the things that I found interesting was, looking at all your, fantastic videos. You mentioned in one of your videos that you suffered a bit of burnout during your time, and I thought it was a very honest, straightforward, and pretty captivating video. I wonder if you'd mind talking a little bit about what you experienced and whether that was due to the work that was going on, because I think that's something that a lot of other content designers can relate to and
Yeah,
sympathize with.
I think there's a lot of layer leading to why I ended up getting burnt out. And I think one of the layers is cultural layer. I, grew up in China, very collectivist society, very ambitious with a lot of the goals in life. In school, you got to always be the top students. And then when you transition naturally to working, it becomes your career progression, being a marker of how valid you are as a person.
Hmm.
And I had to unlearn that a lot. And I was definitely still applying a lot of the principles to my day-to-day job. I want to be the best content designer that any UX designer has been worked with. I want to
Yeah,
be great at my work. I want to do everything well, but like you can't do everything well. That's impossible.
yeah.
Um, so I think, during the time that I was burnt out, a lot of content designers were getting laid off as well. And that impacted me too. Like going on LinkedIn and seeing people who are super talented getting laid off didn't make me feel great, because who am I to say that I am better or more fortunate than these people?
Hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, I think I just reached a point where I was like, you know what? Every time I open my laptop, my heart rate goes up. I feel like I'm gonna cry,
Hmm.
and I need to stop. And
Hmm.
that's what I did.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is, first of all, I identify with that feeling of like wanting to be the best at something,
Hmm.
particularly with like the it's I just when I was working full time, it's like I always have to set a goal for myself. It's always like, oh, I'm not just satisfied with this. I'm like, okay, when's my next promotion? When's my next
Yeah,
title
yeah.
change? When's my next this or next that? I just started playing this video game, and I'm always like with my friends, and I'm always like, okay, well, now I need to be the best at this. So now I'm like sitting there like during my lunch break watching videos on like how to get better at this stupid game, which is just like it's just ridiculous, right? It's just this ridiculous mindset. Um, but I completely identify with that, and I think there is also, you mentioned imposter syndrome, earlier. I think for a lot of content designers who work in tech, where you're surrounded by people who have this very deep knowledge of a lot of technical elements about how the software is actually built. I don't know if you've ever felt like this, but I kind of sometimes I felt that like, oh, I'm just sort of here along for the ride. I'm sort of just like holding on to the side of the train, dangling behind it. I'm not. I don't feel necessarily at the core of what the software is. I sort of just feel like I'm on the periphery, and
Hmm.
that can definitely, in my experience, contribute to that feeling, because you feel like, well, I'm doing my best, but I'm also like, if I wasn't here, who would notice, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the feeling that I've had in the past. I don't know if that's something that you felt as well during that
No,
time.
no, totally. I think, I've been in the industry for 5 years now, and some of the old problems that we've had as content designers 5 years ago is still not solved. Like
Hmm.
getting left out on a launch email, not being credited when you did most of the work, not being invited to meetings, not being cared for, or not being respected. PM telling you that this thing only takes 5 minutes, but when it never takes 5 minutes, and
Hmm.
boundaries constantly being stepped over. These things are still happening, and it still happens at my role, even though I have built a lot of knowledge on managing them. When it happens, it's still hard for me to detach that from that thing being a direct attack of me as an individual.
Yeah.
And I think that was really hard for me to, separate that, like, my work identity and myself as a person, these are two separate things. And still learning, still trying to figure that out. But
Yeah.
seeing that, okay, I'm struggling at this part. Other content designers are not having a great time either at their companies not being respected. And I think, like us writers, we have there's a level of sensitivity, or like the tenderness of our heart, that makes us good writers. And the, I think, yeah, the tenderness makes it harder when the attacks comes at us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a process, and I think, therapy was very helpful, to break down a lot of the layers of why I reached the point, why I even have a relationship with work the way it is.
Yeah.
Why do I always want to strive for the best, and why do I attach my self identity so much with my job?
Mm.
And I think even till this day, when I introduce myself to someone new, within 5 sentences, I'm like, oh, I'm a content designer,
Mm.
which means I do this and that.
Mm.
So I'm trying to, detach that a little bit, and we're so much more than our jobs. Um, it's
It's
just
that.
not.
Yeah. It's interesting. Have you seen that show Severance on Apple TV?
No, I have not.
Okay. It's a weird show, but it's great. The idea is that these people who work at this company go through a procedure that severs their personalities. So they walk into the building where they work and they have no memory of what they are outside of the company. And then once they walk outside, they do their work, then they walk outside, and they revert back to their outside of work personality. So when they're outside of work, they have no idea. They don't know what goes on inside the company. So every day they go to work and they walk through the door and they have no idea what they're walking into, and vice versa. And it's this great commentary on what is the nature of work, and the personality and so on.
Hmm.
I also find that extraordinarily difficult to separate my sort of work life and life outside of that. um, I I wish I could. I can't. And so it just becomes a matter of just like navigating that. But I completely identify with the idea of like, uh, this is not. Yeah, I wish I could do that sometimes to sever the two, but yeah, it's extraordinarily difficult. And once you experience like a whether it's a layoff or I take things really personally. If I get like one negative piece of feedback, I don't know if this is like you, not even negative, just like, hey, you did these 8 things really great. For these 2 things, just make sure you work on this and this. I go home, I'm like, fuck, like I've got to do better at this, like never
The
mind the
two
eight
things will
thing.
be the yeah, the
Yeah,
two things will be the only thing you think about for like the rest of the week.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Are you like that, or because I
Yeah.
feel like that all the time?
Yeah, I am like that. Yeah. I mean, like, at least, like, I don't know, for me growing up, being in Asian culture, like A minus is an Asian fail.
Right.
So it's always striving for perfection, and I feel like myself was only validated when I was doing really well in school, when I was playing the cello well, when I was like doing all the things the best, and
Hmm.
otherwise I am like not worthy of a person.
Mm.
But it's not
It's
healthy.
no, but it's. I have an interesting relationship with it because I also think that part of that is good because part of you needs to be able to objectively look at that feedback and be able to say, how can I improve? Like it's good to have that sort of driven mindset, but it can just drive you absolutely nuts. And I also, like, in tech, it goes way too far because you have people who it leads into I don't want to get too deep into this because people will email
I
me.
get it.
But like, they're like, it's like the bro culture of tech. Like if you're not doing this, and if you're not learning this, and if you're not doing, like, what are you doing? Spending time, watching TV. You could be learning Python or whatever. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. Um, I don't know. I just find that whole sort of culture like I agree with like working hard and whatever, but I find that sort of culture like quite disgusting if I'm honest. Yeah.
It's a trap.
Yeah. I mean,
It's a
have you
trap.
I'm sure you've come into it like working at, these two companies. Um don't name names, but I'm sure you come across people who are like, yeah, I'm sure you've come across all different types of personalities that you've had to deal with.
No, yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah. So I think and so what really stands out to me is that despite having worked in these quite tough environments, you're a very pleasant person. You've got this quite pleasant demeanor, and you're clearly very talented, but also very nice to talk to. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what it's taken for you to really survive and thrive in these cultures. You've described a little bit, about the, in terms of the type of work and the context switching and those types of skills. But what have you really learned about not only managing those different personalities, but managing the work? Because you started very early in your career at quite a big and complex company, and then working in tech in general. So what are some of the things that have helped you survive and do well?
Yeah, I think coming from a collectivist society, caring about others comes really naturally for me. I
Hmm.
think a lot about what are their objectives, what would make them happy, and I try to see if I can meet them in the middle.
Hmm.
And that comes very naturally because growing up, it's always about caring about the collective goal rather than your individual goal. And I rarely have the conflict of uh, which can be bad sometimes, that my goal is not being achieved because I'm catering towards others. I'm
Hmm.
still trying to balance that because I think in corporate America, at least, not advocating for yourself is not a good thing.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so trying to balance the two, but I think people just want to be seen, and when they feel seen, I think the working relationship becomes a little more smooth,
Hmm.
and I I get to understand their objectives in hopes that they will put in some effort to understand my objectives too.
Hmm.
And I found that to be pretty helpful, even with some of the more difficult personalities that I deal with at work. Once I spend some time to get to understand them, what they want, how they work, how they prefer to communicate, it becomes a lot less clunky when it comes to working together.
The the point about the two different cultures is interesting because I too have experienced what it's like living in a slightly more collectivist culture in Australia, and then also working with a lot of Americans, who, yeah, you as you pointed out, advocating yourself and individuality is like a big thing.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to me because a lot of uh, I don't know if you've experienced this, but like when I've worked with Americans, they tend to be very like um everything's quite serious, like and things tend to be a little bit more formal. And there have been times where I've just talked to people and I'll just be like, we could just talk about what you want and you could just state it plainly. What do you want? What's your objective here? And then you can just talk it out. Like it doesn't have to be like we can come to a compromise here and just talk plainly. I don't know. It tends to be like that. My feeling is that the American work culture can be quite combative at times.
It is. It is. And I think, like climbing up that corporate ladder, I don't know how this environment is set the way it is, but it seems that you gotta always be stepping on other people's toes so that you can climb up faster. And
Hmm.
even staying stagnant is moving backwards. So that's not good, and you gotta not do that.
But I mean, that
And
goes back to like, sorry, go on.
no, I just find that I still find that very difficult. Like, I don't like talking about my achievements. I love uplifting others.
Yeah.
I love finding achievements or things that were overlooked and making sure that that gets highlighted. I feel way more comfortable doing that than talking about, wow, look at me dragging the revenue from 400 million to $6 billion. Like, I could not care less about that.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the people who act pretty serious at work. Like, I know on a daily life, like you would not talk like that to your kids. You don't talk like that to your friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So why are you like that?
Yeah. Just be chill. I think it's like I can't speak to China obviously, but it's interesting to me the difference between, for instance, Australian and American cultures. To me, like not to get too deep about it, but I think it goes back to like how the two countries were founded. To survive in America, you had to be really tough. You had to.
Mm-hmm.
There were people there who they came to America to either escape some sort of persecution or start a new life for themselves. And a lot of people, they moved westward, living in frontier territories, and they had to and they had to be really tough to survive. For Australians, it wasn't like that. I mean, yes, obviously there was a little bit of that, but for a lot of people, it was because when they moved here, it was already settled. There aren't that many places to live here. And so it was, you live and settle in, one of a few cities, and we were a prison colony. And I think that really comes through in the in the skills and the traits that determine your success in the workplace in either country. Those things still reverberate today. And to me, like what you've described is a great mix, a healthy mix of the two cultures. The individuality of America and trumpeting your achievements, but also the collectivist approach, which is how can we both get what we want here. To me, that's
Mm-hmm.
how, I don't know, any person, especially in such an important industry and massive industry as tech, to me that's the healthiest way to go about it.
Yeah, I think everyone would feel a little better being taken care of. And I
Hmm.
care about a lot about, taking care of others. Whether that's like just my content design community. I think, yeah, I think there's got to be like different voices in the work culture to balance that out a little bit. And I try to do that on an individual level.
Well, that's it. We've solved it. We've solved all the problems in
Yeah,
tech.
there's no more problems.
Everything's fine now. Um, we're wrapping up here because we're just about running out of time. This has been a great conversation. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd want to mention about anything?
Ooh, that's hard. I didn't prepare anything. I didn't know what I was coming into.
That's fine.
um, I guess we can talk a little bit more about like just online presence,
Hmm.
and stuff like that. Because you were mentioning that there were a lot of content designers who are really great designers who have no online presence, and
Yeah.
I want to see more of people being online. I mean, like I hate LinkedIn. I'm sorry.
I think everyone does at some level.
Yeah, like it's really dreadful to go on LinkedIn and then somehow the algorithm prefers the negative news because more people interact with it, so you just see the echo chamber of people being laid off.
Yeah.
But I want to see more online presence from content designers
Mm.
doing cool stuff, or just sharing their day-to-day lives. I
Yeah.
think the at least like the YouTube, TikTok space, really dry in terms of content designers,
Mm.
and I think we can add a lot really interesting perspectives to the mix.
I would like to do more. The one thing I think is hard to get over is the cringe factor, where you kind of like do it and you're kind of like, ugh, who do I think I am doing this? Like, why am I posting my
Yeah,
face on social media? Like, yeah,
yeah,
it's
I
hard.
go through that with every single one of my video. I like finish editing it and then I publish it, and I was like, wow, that was the worst video I've ever done. It's gonna be so awful. I look so cringe, and I'm still waiting for the day of someone who goes to my LinkedIn DM or something, and as a content professional and attacks some of my opinions or something like that. I feel like it's gonna happen to
Then
me
you know
one
you've made
day.
it though. Like,
That's right.
yeah. Then you know that you're doing something right. But I agree with you. Like, I think I just put out a call recently because I upped our payment for blog posts on UXCC, and I'm like, please send me blog posts. Like, I want more of them, and it is amazing the number of people who will downplay their experience or what they've done because they think it's uninteresting. So people will say, and then they end up pitching me things that they think will be interesting, and they never
Mm,
are. They're never good. It's always like, oh, well, I think this will be successful, and it'll be like top tips for UX writing, and I'm just like, ugh. But then they'll be like, well, I did this, little thing where I reorganized the taxonomy for this legal software, and I'm like, that's interesting. You know what I mean? The more
Yeah.
specific, the better it is. Usually, you just have to get over the cringe factor.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think, like at the end of the day, no one's going to remember it. So you might as well just do it.
It's a good reminder. Like, so much of social media and the internet is ephemeral. So just do it.
Yeah.
You've got nothing to lose unless you're saying something racist or something.
Well, yeah, don't do that.
Don't do that. But yeah, no, I think I agree, and it's a great reminder. Where can people find you online and connect with you? Plug everything you got.
Well, I have a YouTube channel. I have TikTok if it doesn't get banned in the next, I don't know, months or so. I'm on Instagram as well. My Instagram and TikTok are both Yvonne.ux. And then my YouTube is just Yvonne Content Design. So you'll be able to find that pretty easily. Like, subscribe, whatever, so that you can encourage me to do more videos, because I am a huge procrastinator thanks to my ADHD. But when I have external pressure, I tend to do things a little faster.
Well, hopefully this will be pressure for you, and we'll link to all that. So this has been a great chat. I think you've given people a lot to think about. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.